Hello, I'm Christine Nicholas. Thank you for joining us for defining the true cost of vacancy. I'm here today with my TikTok crush, Ashley Hurd. Give us a wave, Ashley, so we know who you are there.
Hello.
In case you don't know Ashley. You must follow Ashley on TikTok, on LinkedIn. You can find her anywhere. If you want to take snippets and learn really important data within a minute to 30 seconds, you need to follow Ashley. And I'm sure by the end of today, you'll get a good idea on. With me, as always, Jessica Roberto, People Science Director of Process Engineering. Jess is going to keep us lined up. Jess, do you want to say a few words about how our participants can communicate with us?
Sure. So we have chat disabled for this webinar, but if you do have a question throughout any portion of our conversation, feel free to use the Q&A. Put your questions in there. I'll keep track of them, and we will do our best to get them answered towards the end.
Awesome. And questions are always welcome. I also know that there are some people very interested in the topic, thought leaders in TA. Matt, Jordan, giving you a shout out if you're there. If you guys have some questions or you want to throw something in at any point, just, let Jess know through the Q&A and we'll make sure and address that too. So a lot of information to cover today. Again, thank you for joining. I have personally been working on the cost of vacancy, actually since late 80s when I first started to enter the workforce. We didn't call it cost of vacancy until the early 90s, but this is such an underrepresented term, right? The COV, as you'll hear it called quite often, is something that isn't, I think I see fragmented versions. Actually, maybe you can add to that too. But the power behind the cost of vacancy is incredible. And those are the things that we're going to talk about first today. So we'll go through the meaning, the definition, the power of cost of vacancy, the human toll. So what is the toll on organizations when they're without staff or any given position? Who should be involved in determining the cost of vacancy? We'll give you a sample. We'll show you the sample calculator, and we will also make available to you a calculator that you can use on your own via our website that we'll be sending out to you after this week. We'll go over a short case study, although throughout the presentation today, I'll talk about different ways that we've seen this used. And then we'll talk about how important it is to use this data wisely, because there's a lot of power behind it. Anything to add before we move ahead, Ash?
No, I'm excited. I think it's going to be comprehensive, and I always like a webinar that has some good takeaways. So I'm excited for what everyone will get.
Right, and that's our goal. Our goal is to educate you on what this is and give you the tools that you need to start working on these things in your own organization. So what does it mean? If you think in terms of a profit and loss statement, the cost of the organization while a position remains open, very simple, just like it sounds. So the equation, thinking in a mathematical sense, is simple as the value of the proposition minus the cost of the position equals the COV. The challenges come in the details and collecting the detail. We're going to talk about a portion of the cost of vacancy, which includes the cost per hire. So to give you an idea, if I look this year at clients that we've been working with through People Science, we've got clients that are saying their cost per hire, as they determine it, is about 1/8 of what we would project it is, because it's not completely inclusive. So if you're familiar with cost per hire and you know that there's a lot of variables in there and you can shortcut them, you can take them down to a lower size and amp them, the cost of vacancy is the same thing. Our objective today, or my objective, is to get you to the point where you're using real data all the time, wisely and inclusive. Okay. So where is the power? And we're going to look at this from several different points. The first one is culture and employee retention. Right? And I know that, Ashley, I know you have another slide here that we can jump to in the beginning, but I'm just going to go through some of the points here. So understanding the value of the employee equals better respect for their work. And, if you can kind of even put this in your own perspective, let's say you've got an employee who's quite challenging. And we are now in the day and age where a challenging employee is somebody that we need to look at, okay, how can we help them, but how can we help ourselves, and how can we as managers and leaders become better at what we do, even though we might be frustrated with working with a new person or a new hire. So at that same time, this is a matter of, if you understand the value of the position, the way you look at the position changes. And when the way you look at the position changes, the way you look at the person in the position changes. So if you're looking for a catalyst to move your culture and your needle from that employer-employee balance, this is a really good tool to use that. Higher value creates more engagement from management to employee. So if I see the value of my employee is higher than I had anticipated, I'm naturally going to be more engaged and a different type of engagement. The employee's confidence increases, leading to more. So it's a circle, right? It's all connected. It's this continuum. I understand your value monetarily. I'm treating you differently because of that. You're engaging with me more, and the circular process really helps elevate the whole cause. Engagement leads to increased respect from all parties. So you see how we're changing the culture based on the business economics, right? And the employee's value being valued. So Ash, I'm going to jump to your human cost before we go back to the other fragments.
Yeah, I really like in this webinar talking about data, because so often I think decisions are made just in this wholesale idea without data. We've got to do this without looking at the numbers and looking at the ramifications and making really crafted decisions based on actual data rather than a gut response. And so, Christine, you'll go through a lot of the data behind this, but what you bake into some of the data is a lot of this human toll. And that's the part that I think is cool, that there's ways that you can quantify some of the more qualitative aspects. So looking at the cost of vacancy, there's a lot that I think, to Christine's point in that column, is about organizations taking things for granted often. Having a group of employees taking for granted that they'll stay as long as you want them to stay. Or if a position is open, that you'll be able to hire qualified candidates at the time that you want to hire them and on the terms that you want to. But people are people. And so I have worked in legal and HR. And so when I make TikToks, a lot of what I get that's really interesting to me is these responses. And talking about data and sample size, these are all very qualitative comments, but you can see these a lot are snippets I've taken right after. Frequently comments like these get a ton of likes and engagement and yes, yes, yes. And these are comments I get. So when I've done videos that are around vacancies, sometimes they're around ghosting, because you really look at it from both, we talk about this, the employee side and the applicant side. And there is reputational and engagement cost. Reputation often goes towards applicants, but there's some for employees. So let's talk about it from applicants. So talk about that vacancy. When you have that, a lot of the questions are the toll. How long is that time? So some of these comments, they told me they sent out offers in 2 weeks. It's been 3 months and I've heard nothing. What's that experience like from that candidate side? And what are they going to say? Because they are going to say something about you and it's not going to be good. They don't just keep those feelings internally. The more people have experiences like this, like a ghosting, or they're told one time frame and then never told when or why that time frame might change, people start talking. They go online, they tell their friends and family. And so that's a lot of that reputational cost. A lot of these things you'll see. It's decency, if you've interviewed, to at least call the candidate back. They could be your client one day. So it's that third party in there. There's applicants, there's employees, and there's general public or potential customers or clients for your business. Talking about ghosting, or they've added 3 more interviews to the process while I'm interviewing. All of these things that are the toll of the vacancy that can have that impact to the organization. To the flip side, when I talk to people that will say, I had this interview, they let me know exactly what the time frame would be. They proactively communicated and everything was on schedule. That is the biggest green flag. On TikTok, sometimes people will say all the time, green flag, green flag. And what that means is that's a sign of a really good organization. And so just like on Glassdoor or any of those services, or look at a Yelps of the world, people rarely will go to put good comments out there. But now you are seeing in the talent and the application world that when people have a good experience interviewing, now more than ever, they're vocalizing that and talking about what a great place that is, what a great experience that is. And so there's real benefits. So there's costs and benefits from the applicant and the employee side as well. That engagement aspect. If you have a vacancy and you're not saying anything to employees, or you're assuming, again, taking for granted they'll take on that extra work, that's a cost to those employees that can cost them in productivity, engagement. All of a sudden, they feel like I've been taken for granted, so maybe this isn't the right organization for me. So this one vacancy can have these ripple effects on how applicants can look, employees, and ultimately customers and the public. So these are some of the qualitative responses you'll see of the impact of what you do in that vacancy and how you communicate it. So these are some of mine that I thought were helpful to look at that human toll. But Christine, I'll let you get back to some of the data as well.
Yeah, and we are going to take a dive into the data soon, but to this point, and this is new, I think over the last couple of years, although we started it before, looking at what's the reputational cost. I love that term. But when you look, and it's easier to do for some positions than it is for others. I think Glassdoor has been helpful in that respect in some ways, right?
Yeah.
But especially where we are right now in HR, if you can start to quantify, especially in the B2C world, where your candidate is your customer, right? So if you can start to quantify how many customers might be at stake. So I'll give you a real life example. Let's say you're applying for a job at the Gap. The people who apply for a job at the Gap work at the Gap. You know, apply for them are typically customers, right? You're not going to apply for a store that you're, for the most part, that you're not a part of. If that encounter doesn't go in your direction, if you don't receive a callback, if you go into a black hole, or if you're rejected, there's a good chance that you're going to go through what we call remorse buying. So you're never going to want to go to the Gap. Think of it this way: you don't want to hire me, now I have to walk in there, I'm embarrassed, I don't fit, I'm angry, I'm annoyed. So what is the value? And I think in human resources, especially in TA, what we haven't done a good job of is translating what that relationship means to the bottom line of our organizations. So metrics like the cost of vacancy can really bring those things to light and really empower us in the TA space, in human resources, to build a case for why the entire organization needs to know about this and value their candidates and their customers in the same accord.
If I can add one thing, Christine, on that as we finish up, is the words you used, embarrassed and things like that. I often, in the themes of my videos I make, is the theme that doing the right thing should be the right thing to do because it's humans working with humans. But I understand, I'm a realist, and oftentimes you have to show that business case, and there can be that real business case and have outcomes. That's why I think it's important. But if you think back in framing in these vacancies, and as you communicate those feelings of embarrassment, oftentimes that's a best case scenario. Some of the comments I get as well are real to the core, things that just gut you. People that are devastated, that are counting on, communication for their families, and the roller coaster of emotions is some of the most extreme. And so I often say when I'm talking to people, if you think about how you'd want a loved one, like a loved one, not somebody you're fighting with at the holidays, but a true loved one, and what you would want them to be, what that experience would be like for them, it can help frame that human element, because it really is a superpower in TA and in all of the strategic partners, which we'll talk about, are multiple people in the different departments, but it really is a superpower of the benefit you can have to someone's personal and professional life, as opposed to that cost in their mental health. And there can be impacts as well on your unemployed benefits, on all of these costs when people go through these really devastating experiences. And so I think that human toll or that human benefit really cannot be emphasized enough.
And what we could do, actually, maybe we should do this, and maybe a show of hands for the participants in the webinar. Moving into Q1, perhaps Ashley and I could do another webinar that talks specifically, because this is a big topic, right? How do you quantify treating people human?
Yeah.
Right? How do you quantify that? But it can be done.
I'll raise my hand.
You can't do it. You probably can't pick up the whole picture. But I think the challenge that we do have is that we are businesses, right? No, I had an accountant say to me the other day, well, no margin, no mission, no company. And I hear that a lot, especially from the C-suite. We really do want to be more mindful of how we treat candidates, but we don't have the budget for that this year. Where are we going to find the extra resources? So always being able to make that financial business case. We are a capitalist society, right? So we've got to get really good at translating what that means. Now, I've got to tell you from a personal level, I would much rather just be nice to people because I want to be nice to them. And I want them to be nice to me, right? But we do, I think if we take some of this and we maybe look at some specific case studies, because that's a whole other thing. What do you think? Maybe we'll do something like that in the first quarter?
I think it sounds great. I think it's super
I saw a couple of people saying yay, so I think we're good with that.
Yep, I think that's spot on.
So that is that first bucket, culture and employee retention, right? The second is business operations and planning. So talk about more detailed cost analysis. And of late, I will tell you, the two most recent partners that we've had in determining cost of vacancy came from operations. They did not come from HR. Operations saying, wait a minute, this feels like it's costing me a lot of money. I don't know how to quantify it. How much is this if I'm not filling the position? One example we had is we were working with a cable company in St. Thomas. which of course the cable company in St. Thomas is everything. That's the only way the island can communicate. And their cable provider was having difficulty getting talent to move to the island and stay there. Sounds glamorous, right? But there's like one ship that comes once a month. It was a very difficult position to keep these techs filled. But we actually, because we had our operations people were in the field always fixing the system, they weren't able to do the interviews that they needed to. And the cost of vacancy, as you'll see in another slide in a few minutes, kept escalating because they couldn't fill the position. So the more you can't fill the position, the higher the cost of vacancy gets, right? So it was costing them $1,200 a day to have these positions open. That was a lot of money. Once we were able to present that to the hiring manager and saying, hey, if we can buckle down for the next week and meet at night and get this done, we can start to close that financial gap and get the right people in the right place at the right time. But we needed to do that detailed analysis, and we needed operations really on board. So the second line item is more accurate budgeting, right? That's going to be more accurate because now you have more detail. Comparison cost to the employee versus dissolve or remain open. Such timing on this, right? I have to tell you that we had 3 clients in the past 2 months that have downsized a lot of their TA, right? And well, we've had maybe 6 that have downsized their TA. We've had 3 that come back and said, oh, we pulled the trigger too soon. So had this information been handy ahead of time, and had they incorporated it in their decision process, there's a good chance that they wouldn't have done the layoffs, or the layoffs would have looked differently. So really being armed with cost of vacancy ahead of the game. And one of the questions I did see posed was, okay, so we're going into a layoff mode. How fast and how long does it take to do cost of vacancy? The best practice on cost of vacancy is to create the cost of vacancy when you open the position, right? Doesn't that make sense? Because that is when you're saying, hey, we need this. Let's say it's a call center. We need to add 10 extra call reps. Well, let's quantify that. What does it look like that we don't have people in those positions now, right? Or let's say you're starting a whole new division or a whole new organization. If you're in startup mode, this is probably one of the smartest metrics you can use. We all know this story, right? Startup gets up, startup gets going, startup overhires, startup lets everybody go. I know this because as an RPO partner, there's many times when we've jumped in because they've lost their entire TA team because they overhired, sometimes by 30, 40, 50%, and now it drops down. If you're looking at your cost of vacancy, it's going to help you make a better hiring decision originally, and it'll increase your retention with them too. So at the beginning, at the onset is a good time to start to do this work. A different view of profitability of a division, department, and position. This is really cool, by the way. When you first start to work on the cost of vacancy, if you have not done this before, look at the entire organization because it's easier to get that data. I know it sounds crazy, but the macro data is easier to get. What's the total revenue of the organization? What's the average cost per employee? And now we see what that gap is with some variables in there. And then you can take that and apply it to an entire division. In fact, I've seen entire organizations, and this is where the power comes in, just close out an entire division because the cost of vacancy was too high and they didn't want to put more money into the research on it. On the flip side, I've seen them fund divisions even more. So you need to be careful with this data. And again, this is under the operations side. And then take it and disseminate into the individual positions. Now, you don't have to do it that way, but it's just an interesting way of looking at things. And I think if you're talking to the C-suite from a human resource perspective, this is a good way to come at it with the business at your side.
Christine, I'll say, I think this is one of the points I think in this whole slide, and I know this one's chock full, is because I do think so many now are getting this dictate of we have to cut, whether we have to cut 30% or we have to cut 20% or 5%. And it's this wide swath. And it really, as you talk about division, department, and position, the cost of vacancy literally by each of these can vary tremendously. And so having this data going into this, I think is so important because as you say in the one above, what happens if you make too deep a cut and have to go back? Well, now you've realized you need more people in that position, which probably means the people that you kept are overworked. So they're probably talking to all of your competitors or whoever and looking to get out of there as soon as possible. And so if you can be more bespoke in this data and look about the cost of vacancy and really think as you're making these rather than do this, we've got to cut 30% overnight. if you can take some time, in just a few days even, and looking at this data, I do think can help the organization and help the people within that organization tremendously. So I think looking at it not just as an organization wide, but really by department, position, division, I think is a really powerful step.
Exactly. And good segue to the last bullet under operations planning, because when we look at do I outsource, do I insource a department, right? And how much PR have we seen out there where people are saying they outsourced my job and I had to train the people that I outsourced and I was here for 20 years and this was terrible. When you could come at it from a financial perspective of a cost of vacancy, whether or not you decide to insource or outsource, you have a better conversation with real data, even though humanly it's terrible to lose your job. I mean, we all know that, right? But if you can empower people a little bit by saying, this is the actual reasoning, and you have more data, you're going to make a better decision. You're going to feel more comfortable with the decision, and then you can explain it better to whoever has to be removed, right? The other thing that I'll add under business operations is our R&D heavy-weighted customers, pharmaceuticals, technology companies, they have business plans around the product that they're trying to develop and when it's going to come out. Whether or not that product stalls is dependent on how much funding they can receive until they get to certain milestones. Really putting the cost of vacancy when you're doing those calculations, working with finance and putting it in an R&D sense makes a lot of sense. I think there's at least 4 or 5 technology companies we know that have recently done layoffs, and what they've cut back in may not be or may be R&D, but when I look at those that are doing the cost of vacancy, they're smarter moves. They've made smarter moves. And they've even taken this cost of vacancy and used it with some of their outsourcing partners to help them make better decisions on how they can create a better outsourced solution for them. So, and then, the last caveat I will give with this is so often there's this operations pointing at HR and HR pointing at operations, and it's hard to get the two in the same field, right? There's not a lot of, let's face it, human resources is not respected as well as it should be, right? Even when you watch TV, with Toby from The Office, the HR person is always the hated person. I don't hate you actually, but it is, we don't often get a lot of respect in human resources. So having this conversation with your business and operations and getting them to understand where your head is and how you're looking at this from a business perspective and giving them thoughts and ideas that you can collaborate with, you can actually really take the finger pointing and meld it into a very good collaborative environment. So I can't tell you that I have not seen a collaborative environment in every single initiative when HR is working with ops on this topic, and especially when they were feuding before. So good way to do that. Okay, next bucket is workforce planning. More sound decisions, staffing up and staffing down. I think we just covered that, right? And then our outsourcing decisions again. Under elevating the human resources value, uncommon but not crucial financial data share. So uncommon but crucial. This, I think because it's not common and it's not popular, it's not used, but it's crucial. I think there's a large hole in organizations where the COV isn't acknowledged or nobody knows about it or no one's working on it. So this is really crucial data that you're missing in your plan, period. Rethinking the layoffs, building an inclusive culture, promoting transparency. Again, when you can talk figures, it does take it out of the personal. Not all the time, but it helps to, right? Promoting learning and development. If I know my cost of vacancy is going to be $200 a day, and I know that it's going to take me 50 days to make a hire, as an operations leader, I may say, let me see if I can upskill this person that I'm thinking of terming before I make a difference. And how can I partner better with L&D? Because L&D, learning and development, has to be a part of this decision and the discussion of the cost of vacancy. We'll get to that in a second. Creating management buy-in, we did talk about, and then the effectiveness for Talent Act in particular. Increasing the recruiter's value to the organization. If you can come at this from a TA perspective, all of a sudden you're a lot more than the person that just gets me people. The resounding theme for talent acquisition is just get me people. And it's amazing to me, given what we've gone through in the last 2 years and how that power shift between employee and employer is changing and how important your candidate market is, the understanding of the value of talent acquisition within individual organizations has not kept pace. I think we can all agree on that. Right? This is one way to start elevating TA even further. Gaining the higher managers, shortening your time to fill. I think one of the main reasons we started this in 2000 with a particular client was because we could not get the hiring managers to understand that they had to talk to a candidate within a few days or we're going to lose them. Now it's like almost same day or the second day. So if you can say to them, it's costing us $1,200 a day to have this open, maybe they're going to look at it differently when it comes to interview, right? Especially if their uplines know about it. It just changes the way the whole process goes. And then again, more accurate budgeting. Anything to add before we move on? Just checking my time here too.
No, I would like these, certainly the fourth column on HR's value and the Talent Act, I think is, a lot of times when I'm giving advice, especially in HR or managers, everything is to make other people's lives easier and elevating what you're bringing to that conversation. Yeah, great. How do you do that? Having some of that quick data and bringing more. Again, nothing is a perfect science, but it is a science, and having data makes it better. And so bringing that rather than just being exactly same old, here's the people, breaking those molds is really important. And again, rethinking, okay, you have this person, when you have existing employees, often you will hear layoffs. Okay, we have these open positions. And so when I've done posts or you see LinkedIn posts about layoffs, frequently you'll see the comments about these people being laid off have skills. They're there. What could they do? Are there open critical positions? And so shifting people around. Sometimes I feel like it's like, the applicants are like the shirt and new employees are the jeans. I don't know about you. For some reason, I swear I'll wear the jeans like 4 or 5 times before I wash them, which hopefully that doesn't make me sound, but like you just take it for granted, like pants you take for granted, shirts you wash every time. And so giving more time and attention to the idea of we got to find an applicant to do this rather than looking at this beautiful pair of jeans that you could, fray a little bit and change up to have fit into that position. I do think being strategic in that aspect, but having some of that data behind it to talk about that vacancy, I think is really powerful. So I really like that as well.
I love the jeans and the shirt analogy. It's awesome.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad I'm not the only one. And maybe it's like 2 to 3 times. Maybe I should walk myself down a little bit. We'll see. I'll have to keep a little planner.
Yeah, and just one more thing before we move on. A shout out to attorneys, government contractors, anybody who works in an environment with employees that work at a billable rate, right? A lot of times when they're benched, you start to look at them like, oh my gosh, this is a big expenditure. If you start to think in terms of cost of vacancy, you can make a better decision. Is that an expenditure? Maybe you send them to training on something else while you're waiting for something to come in to assign them to.
Yeah. It's why I think when you talk about learning development, we were sharing earlier before the webinar, I've been part of organizations in the legal department, for example, because I'm also a lawyer in addition to HR, where we did rotation programs, and it was a formal rotation program. So, and there's so many benefits to that, even just someone being out on vacation, being able to fill in for someone and be that, but having some of that robust, that don't always take excessive outside resources, excessive spend, but having some of that and being thoughtful about that all along can really help as you look at that cost of vacancy and ways that you can fill in with some of that internal talent and leverage the people that are right there, not even at your doorstep, they're in your living room.
Right. It changes the whole picture.
Yeah.
Okay. So who should be involved? For the revenue side, again, we're thinking profit and loss. So definitely finance and definitely business operations. On the cost side, finance, human resources, talent acquisition, and L&D. There may be other people in here on the cost side that you'll need to go to, but this is, these are the 2 big buckets. You can't do this right without this. So you're going to need buy-in. This is a group effort. Somebody's got to initiate it. I would love to see it come from HR. When it comes from HR, it just boosts us all the way up. It helps everybody. So keep that in mind.
Let me ask you, Christine, going back to that, for example, do you look at this, and maybe you'll get to this, but would you look at this as like an overall exercise, or as each position is coming up? Because I'm sure there's individuals on the webinar that are getting these dictates about, a broad scale hiring freeze and thinking, how do I do this? How time intensive, if I'm going to finance, business ops, all of these, am I doing this on a position by position basis, or is it a periodic time you recommend looking every year?
We're going to take a look at the calculator to give you the ingredients. The short answer is it depends, and I hate to give that answer. But that's one of the reasons it's good to do this proactively. And you're coming into a new year, so this is a good time to do it.
Yeah.
This is a practice. This is not something that you do once and it's done. I'm going to show you a couple of differences in the years as the time progresses for cost of vacancy and as different variables come into play. But it's a metric that we want to keep looking at. So once we establish it, once you get your calculator down and you understand what's going on, it makes it a lot easier.
Okay.
Back to the big point, you can do it from the company as a whole, right? And by the way, a lot of times decisions to downsize come from looking at the company as a whole. Each employee cost us $30,000 a year. I can eliminate 10, then I'm saving myself $300,000, right? And then when you do a deep dive, that's not the case, of course. But that's just a generic. And then divisionally, and then by the individual positions. But if you really want to get started, if you're concerned now, just by having these conversations, you're going to bring into play and into the conversation those that are determining the layoffs, right? Operations, finance, they're going to be involved in this conversation. HR is going to be involved. So if they say you want a list, okay, help me to create this list. I really want to find out what the value of Harry is. So when we look at Harry's position, here's what I'm finding. And then I will tell you, finance will right away, they're almost always engaged. And I know there's some finance people in here. Thank you very much for being on board. They'll want to get involved because nobody wants to say, well, we made a decision with half of the financial information, right? We all want to make sure that that's inclusive. So as soon as you get other people involved, you'll start to see that you'll get more data quicker.
Yeah.
So you can kind of play that back to them. If they say, I don't care, well, then you need to look at who you're talking to.
That's a red flag. That's what we call a red flag as opposed to the green flag. No, but I think this is a really
and then a
helpful slide.
stopgap is a furlough, right? So
Yeah.
instead of laying people off, if we're that tight for cash, especially our Series Bs or startups, if you're that tight for cash, go to furlough until you can figure out the cost of vacancy and go from there.
Yeah,
Jess, I know these are things that you've worked with too. Do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I was thinking back to the slide ahead. I think it's super important for TA to have this data and present cost of vacancy. But at the same point, I think it's really important for TA to make sure that their overall recruitment process is buttoned up. So is everything streamlined? What is your interview process? With that, are hiring managers and TA on the same page? Because in turn, as Ashley was mentioning before on some of those comments she was getting from TikTok, really having a better process in place is going to give you a better candidate experience, and it's going to reduce your time to hire, right? So in the end, that's going to reduce your cost of vacancy. So I think while TA is coming to the table with this info, also, at the same time, are having a streamlined process in place to make sure that everything's buttoned up is just as important.
Right, and they'll start to pay better attention to you when you say we need a candidate experience. Right. I need money to streamline, or I need this tool, or I need this technology to get there.
Exactly.
Lots of power. Okay, this is it. What we're looking at right now is actually, this is a snapshot of the calculator. I put this here really as a placeholder. I'm going to switch over. So this is an actual calculator that we use here at People Science for our customers. As an attendee, in the next few days, you'll be receiving a link that will give you access to the calculator on our website. You'll have to put some information in there. You have to put your name, you have to put your email, but we will not retain the data. So you'll be able to go in and decide and use that calculator to come up with some of this information. You can print it out, you can send some of it to yourself, or you can use it to establish your own guidelines. Understand this is an offering that People Science does. So if you'd like some help with this, you can certainly reach out to us and we can help you. But as a gratis, because this is such an important portion of the US, actually global economy right now, we're making this accessible to people that you can go on and use it as a thought piece on our website. So that link will be coming out shortly. But let's take a look. So, there's a lot of positions that we could have used. By the way, we like to start with the whole company and then go into the divisions, but I'm going to start right away just with the position. This is a particular sample from a customer service position. So this is the position's profit to the company, and we're going to look at it from year 1, year 2, and year 3. So we'll look at the monthly and the total. meaning the yearly total, and then monthly again, and here's our total over here. So these white sections talk about, they define what we're looking at. So this is very specific to each position. Begin by looking at the objective of the position and how it ties to the company's overall revenue, and then what that profit looks like in the end. So that's what we're looking for. In this case, in this customer service position, retention of customers. So the profit each customer multiplied by the amount of retained customers divided by the amount of employees in the position. So you're getting the thought process. Let me go back again, right? So it's the profit from each customer, which finance should be able to give you, multiplied by the average amount of retained customers, right? Because we're looking at the retention of customers from a customer service perspective, divided by the amount of employees in this position. So all those times you make that shout out, this has got to be costing the company money. Take that thought a little bit further. How is that position costing you money? How does it make money for the company? Therefore, how is it costing money? So our next line is the profit, and this is our definition of this. The profit was $60 per customer multiplied by the average amount of retained customers, which was 6,000, divided by the employees in the position, which was 200. Monthly, it's 1,800. Yearly, 21,600, just for that one category. Okay. The next line on new customers as a result of customer referrals. So in this case, we took the total new customers gained by the referral divided by the amount of employees who can influence the customer experience. New customers from referrals, 2,000 divided by 200, 10, and 120. Reduced overtime, the amount of unplanned overtime expended when the department is down one employee. There's going to be another category where you can add price to add staff, where you can add price to move internals over, and price for a manager to sit in the seat. But this is specific just to overtime. In this particular case, it turned out to be $2,852 monthly. And then loss of upsells. So now we're saying there's going to be a loss of the upsell of the customer service for the 10 weeks, $38. Our revenue per position is $6,298, and over the year it's $75,576. I know it's a lot of information, but you can do this. Take some thought. Okay, cost per employee. So now we're going to look at what the costs were. So the salary, easy enough. The loads, in this case, we're using 24%. By the way, the average is 48%, but we're using 24% here. New hire training, 4 weeks. So this is where L&D came in and gave us this number. The cost to recruit in this case is $2,100. The G&A is $300. Miscellaneous cost $250. Cost per employee came up to $5,988. These we're leaving kind of open, but this is where you can put the internal coverage. So if you're moving employees over to cover. By the way, anytime companies lay off, they take the guy who's making 10 times more than the guy who was left, and then they put him over there. And now you're really, right? So where it may have been costing you $20 an hour, it's now costing you $60 an hour just to have somebody cover. Right? So that's a good metric to keep in mind here. And then external coverage, let's say you have to go to an outside staffing company, a temporary or contractor, we're giving you the ability to do that too. In this case, the cost of vacancy for external coverage was 96. And we've got the percentage salary of the monthlies. So now we're at $2,900 with the extended coverage. I'm just going to bounce over to this one. And in this case, the daily cost of vacancy is $207. The weekly cost is $1,453. That is just for a customer service agent. So every day our hiring manager doesn't meet with them, it's costing $207. Every week it's costing $1,453. Just changing the way we look at it. I imagine there's 1,000 questions right now. Remember, what we're trying to show you here is the methodology, and we are going to give you access to our calculator. But I really just wanted to show you the thought process that's involved. Are there any questions that we need to answer at this point, Jess?
Let me check. Let's see. So the first one, when should you or should you not share the cost of vacancy within your own team? Has this ever backfired?
Yeah, It does backfire. That our next slides are going to talk about that too. And yeah, you do have to look at it in your team. I've seen entire divisions dissolve based on this. Right. But if you're using all the data, it's kind of hard to argue with. Any others that I need to answer now?
Yeah, so someone had just popped in a question. What are the steps employers can take to reduce the time of vacancy? And I know we spoke about this and looking at your streamlined recruitment process, making sure hiring managers are trained, for getting those interviews moved through quickly. Is there anything else you could suggest?
Yeah, well, I think when you look at, and that's a really good point. But you need to look at your cost per employees, because that's where it comes in, right? And in this case, cost to hire. I mean, one of the things we didn't get to yet is how this changes as it progresses, right? Because your first year, you can obviously see, to Ashley's point, the retention value as the years go on. Because look at our price, year one is very different than year two and year three. Our costs change because they go down the longer the employee is there. The employee's value to the organization comes up from a revenue standpoint, and it also comes up from a cost saving standpoint. So creating the retention is one way. The other way to reduce cost is to look at each one of these and say, where can we cut back? How do we streamline? But you're bringing attention to that. So for example, if your cost to recruit is $2,100, and that's based on the fact that your jobs are open about 58 days, and TA can come back, or HR can come back and say, this tool will knock that down by just 2 days. Just 2 days, you're reducing it already. This is a game of inches. You're not going to get one giant big fat win, right? If you do, then you really got it. Well, I shouldn't say that. You could get it if you've never done this before and you uncover something really big. But when it comes to budgeting and looking for these holes, this is where you do it. And this is where you can prove your case for your new tool.
Okay.
Did that answer it?
Yes.
Well,
And-
Christine, I think you can definitely see, I can see this being super helpful to have some of those positions by positions. And while everyone, may have their personal opinion and biases on what the most critical positions to fill is, or reverse, which ones to free, which ones to do a hiring freeze, which ones not, in those layoff decisions, having this data and going through it position by position adds a whole nother level of intelligence in thinking about what the cost or benefit to the business is going to be.
Yeah, it's always amazing to me when we work with companies heavily focused on R&D, they will pay $100,000 a year more for a contractor or for an employee than they will for somebody who's already bringing value to the organization, right? The budgets are almost always higher. This is good. This helps balance that scale. And that's really what we need to close the employment gap, right? All these things we talk about we need to be able to get better at hiring. That's what's wrong. And that must come from the organizations. The talent will come when we get really specific about what it is we're looking for, and we get better at hiring and training and focusing on what we're going to do. Right now, for the most part, talent acquisition is always the afterthought. And by the way, it's always the first to get cut when there's some type of a hiring freeze, or the company's, in some type of distress or projecting for a recession, right? These are, with using these tools, you can start to prove your own case. If you really want to get started, do it first in TA.
And
I know it changed our outlook at our own organization. Go ahead.
We just had one more question pop up. Looking at cost for interviewing, posting, etc., any tips on figuring out what that looks like? Example, our managers do a lot of recruiting, reviewing of applications, and HR helps with posting and interviewing. So how would you figure those costs out?
The cost of the hiring manager and the amount of time that they're putting into it.
Okay.
Right. We were talking to an organization last week that was getting rid of all their recruiting, and their managers were going to do all their interviewing. 2 of the managers quit. They don't want to be TA, right? But even if they didn't quit, if you're paying your manager $200,000 a year and you're paying a recruiter $80,000 a year, and you are forcing the $200,000 guy because he has maybe 2 hours more than he used to have, right? Isn't that the thought going to layoffs? Well, Harry can handle it, or Sherry can handle it. this person can handle that, so we're going to move this to this without looking at what those numbers really mean. Did that help?
I
So
think
you
that's
wanna-
spot on.
yeah.
I think that's spot on is what you're saying. It's exactly going back to the point of taking, you can assume this person will cover this. Well, that works if it's, robot 1 and robot 2, but when you bring in that feeling, exactly what you say about the cost, you say having a $60 an hour employee cover something that a $20 an hour employee was doing. So there is that cost, but that feeling and that manager, that if they're staying behind in a layoff situation, likely as a high performer, well thought of. Well, that may be the straw that breaks the camel's back if, she's all of a sudden, or he's all of a sudden, taking this on and adding that not as much value added or more expensive activity to a plate of someone that was performing well can have incredible costs to the organization. I think that's really important, because that's what stuck out to me of the point saying now that the person has a lot of managers doing the resume review and I know what that's like. And there's some benefits to that if someone knows the position, but there's huge cost to it by instead of having dedicated TA staff that can talk and get a real sense of the position, sense of the skills, use data for that, and they take it off running and free up the hiring manager to do the actual work. And in interfering with that can have huge costs to the organization. I totally agree, Christine.
Yeah, and I think it gets tempting, right? Because you do need the hiring manager's input. I cannot tell you how many times we know what we're looking for. We actually create a key elements guide for every interview that we do, and we create them within our own system. We have a very elaborate measuring system that allows us to do a lot of this, by the way. If you're interested, again, you can reach out to us and we'll show you how to do that. But basically, what we found out is you need the hiring manager's influence, because they'll tell you what they need. Then you get them the first interview and they're like, that during the interview is when they figure out what they do or don't want. And that could take 2 or 3. And you know what? You can't shoot them for that, because that's part of the process, right? And I know there's times even when we want to say to the candidate, look, this is a new position, so we're all formulating it, right? And in that case, I've actually had some really good stuff come back. We've had candidates say, you know what you need for this position? Instead of me, you need blank. When you look at the kiosk system for a telecommunications company, that's how it was born. One of the candidates introduced that thought, but that's a whole other story. My point is, you can still have the hiring manager involved without making it their job. It should not be their job, right? And you should be able to quantify that this way. If by chance you've already pulled that trigger, if you're in layoff and you're running a skeleton crew or you've had to reduce things, this is a good time to do the cost of vacancy, because what you don't want to do is rehire without this metric. And it also will help you decide who gets hired first. So if you're in a hiring freeze and all of a sudden the freeze comes off and you're saying, okay, all these positions are approved, but you still have 2 talent acquisition people and 2,500 open positions, where do you start, right? So understanding which company, which has the most value, really helps. Now, again, you've got to get all of operations included, and you'll see some vying. I will tell you, particularly with sales organizations, I have seen this metric, the cost of vacancy, influence them to reduce their own expenditures. So where their travel costs were blank, they've reduced them because they're competitive against their other operational leaders, right? And so if that division's cost is lower than mine, then I can do something here to bring my own value of my own employee up. It's a very interesting, I'm telling you, a very powerful metric. What else?
So someone just commented, this looks exciting, would love to get this implemented, but seems like a lot of work to get it going for an entire organization. Is there resources for consulting work or assistance with this?
That's what we do. So yes. Is there a lot of consult with it? I don't know anybody else who does this work. I know some people talk about it, but frankly, I couldn't even find anything under COV 2 years ago when I Googled it. So yeah, we can help you do this. And you do need help. If the organization is large, if you've got thousands and thousands of employees, you have to look at it differently, right? But it really is based on how many positions you have. So as long as we have the plugins, this is work that we can do for you. Reach out to, just reach out in the contacts and we'll get them. Okay. Anything else?
Those were all we had for now. If anyone has anything else, please put it in the Q&A. All the questions are anonymous and we're happy to get those answered for you.
Okay. Coming back to our deck. So this is a sample of one cost of vacancy analysis that we did for a telecommunications company. This is for direct sales, meaning outside sales reps. I thought what was interesting about this is when they came to us and they wanted us to be their RPO partner for these positions. And I'm like, nobody wants this job. We can't do this. And I've learned never to say can't because of this. Because I've learned over the years not to say can't. And so this one, I'm like, no. And I could not believe it when they said, the operations leader said, look, there's only like 200 people doing this job. The cost of vacancy for this job, not using that term, is $100,000 a year. I've been running these numbers. I want to build a team of 2,000 of these. I'm like, great, but nobody wants to bang on the door and sell cable. So that's what we concluded. But that what we found out is you get what you look for, right? So understanding the cost of vacancy was 100,000 at the time. The budget, the cost per hire for that position at the time was $11,000 a year. And this is going back to I think it was 2009. That same cost now actually has come down a little bit, even though it's even harder to fill. It's like at 10,000. So it's interesting. But he wanted to build a case, and we were like, this isn't going to work because you can't fill it. But we found out we could fill it. And we found out, and this is one of the best metrics, and this is the 5th sample that I can show you, where if we're looking here at the cost of vacancy. So for year 2017, the cost of vacancy was $100,000 with 320 employees. 2018, still at 100,000 with 580. Jumping to 2019, the importance of the position, the cost of the position, everything started to change. And as the amount of employees in the position increased, the cost went down to 62,000. The following year, only 980, back up to 79. The following year, 90,000 to 1050. Interesting, right? Now the position's morphed a little bit since then too. And you can use this graph. Here's your employees, and you can see where it starts to crisscross. This is where we want to keep closing that gap. But as you keep adding to the position, it naturally will migrate the price down. And the longer people are in the position, the cost to employ them will go down. Pretty interesting, right? Nobody wanted to, we didn't want to recruit for these positions. Nobody wanted to recruit for these. But when we saw the value and we were able to get budget, it changed everything. Okay. So this is how you can use this wisely in talent acquisition. Combating the interview reluctance, we talked about that. I think I told you we actually had somebody on a moped riding around catching up with these people in the Virgin Islands for this. To reduce what I call interview reluctance. You know how there's call reluctance, there's interview reluctance. Hiring manager looks at his schedule and says, oh, they want me to do an interview. I'll make that Thursday after next. It won't be tomorrow. This will help reduce that time. Determining what positions to take precedence. We talked about that. Explaining your strategy to the business, strengthening your relationship with finance, and strengthening your collaboration with your business partners. So many ways. There was a question in there. Did I get to that, Jess? Did I say I was going to answer it?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Anything to add, Ash?
Yeah, I think talking about these is so important, because as you talk about in talent acquisition and HR, which are different, but having the respect of the organization and building that, being able to strengthen those relationships. I mean, everybody in these positions wants to strengthen your relationships. And so having these tools, and again, as Christine's saying, having access to the tool, I think is great. Like you can play around with it, getting help for it, I think likely makes sense, but playing around with it and having that data and changes the conversations entirely, rather than, you can look, there's a whole recruiting TikTok, you can go down a rabbit hole on anything on TikTok, but recruiting, where recruiters often talk about this, of like the hiring manager that you say, like the reluctance of like, this is super urgent. Everything in the position description is urgent. And then they go to make the calls and they go, okay, we'll schedule them a couple weeks out. I'm kind of busy. And so being able to quantify that and not just be frustrated and go on TikTok and make a video, but immediately say, okay, well, we have these candidates. This is really tough to hire. This is the cost of vacancy. We can reduce that and increase the likelihood of them, being interested in joining, because we're sending the signals that this is a real need. And so these are the quantifiable costs if we push it out 2 weeks. And so having that grins, again, the word gravitas, I don't really care for in the corporate environment, but for those that it is important to, or that feeling of being credible, having this data can completely change those conversations and strengthen those relationships. And it's a huge arrow in the quiver.
So true. All righty, so what did we talk about so far? These are the takeaways that we think of the cost of vacancy as a profit and loss statement. The cost of vacancy can accomplish cultural goals as well as financial goals. I don't know any other tool that can do that. So as we're moving more towards paying better attention to our cultures and wanting to be more inclusive and more human work, right? This is the only tool that I know of that can help us almost immediately get there. Collaborating with multiple departments brings the best and most accurate outcomes. The components of the cost of vacancy can be very specific and they do require in-depth consideration. That's why operations should be a part, finance should be a part. Anybody in the department, I think, that is able to look at it from a leadership perspective, meaning they can look at it from a 1,000-foot view and say, this is what this position does for the organization. I've quite often been surprised at the individuals in the organization who can do that. And they're not always who you think. But if people in your group know that you're working on this, then you can kind of spot check who they are, look in your division and say, who thinks in terms of these components, and pick them to be on the team, right? The COV can change and should be monitored and adjusted. Adjusting it is a lot easier than creating it, right? But you really need the tool to be accurate coming into any changes. So let's say you have reduced staff and now you're ready to hire, you need to look at that again, right? And now you've already made the hire, so now you've gone back up, you need to look at cost of vacancy again. If you're looking to open a division or starting a new research group or whatever the case is, you want to make sure that you're looking at the cost of vacancy as it is today. It does change. So when you first do it, I always say, put it in play, run it, let's reevaluate in 6 months, and then the next 6 months. And then yearly, you just go in and take a look. Anytime there's new leadership in a division or a department, good way to get on the same, with that first conversation that you have with whoever you're supporting. I think in terms of cost of vacancy, let me explain to you what that is. And then together you start to work on it. Incorporate it into your daily language, make it part of what you do. It packs a big impact, and I think that's the question that people had, it is worth the work. It is worth the work, and it's scary, right? Do it on your own position. That's like, it's tough because you're like, what if I'm not worth it to the organization? If that's the case, make sure you go deeper. Make sure you look at what the real value is. And value sometimes is going to be played out in years, and then that revenue can be put into the top line as a projection, right? So you can't get there from here. Let's say that you want to create a widget factory in Wichita, just making stuff up, right? The cost of vacancy is going to be one thing today, and it's going to look a lot different when there's more revenues to substantiate it, but you're never going to get to the widget factory unless you start with this big cost of vacancy. So keep that in mind as you're looking. But it isn't something that you just share easily. It's something that you want to take a look at from a business perspective. That's one of the reasons that we really like the fact that I saw that a lot of our attendees are at higher level in human resources, because this is not something that you want to start with a junior person. I think talent acquisition leaders, this is a great tool for you to take to your CHRO if you haven't already, or they're not a part of the conversation. But I do love the fact that this can come from TA. Cool. Any other comments or questions? I think we have 1 minute.
Christine, I think some benefit to this I can see is using this, really in depth and thinking about other things like performance. If I hire a strong performer, people think about what tenure do I need? Okay, maybe not tenure, but let's skill set. Do I need someone that's more junior and it's going to need training, or do I need someone that's ready to come in and make deals? And what impact would that be? Because you could certainly, as you look at the profit portion of that, or the revenue aspects of it, you can play around with that calculator, I assume. And as you think about investments in training and managers, what are those, if you play around with some of the cost perspectives, if I add more things in the cost, what can that look like as far as retention? And so I think there's a lot of data that can come out of this once you really master it.
Well, I think you touched on something that we didn't touch on that is important. I know that this has been used, cost of vacancy has been used to determine whether or not pay increases should take place.
Right.
Right. And I think we saw a lot of inflated salaries for positions, and now, right, especially in the tech sector, where we're seeing that come back down now, and they're saying, okay, well, maybe it wasn't a $300,000 position, it's a $100,000 position, because now we found out that we're underwater. So, so many things, so many influencing ways to look at your business, build your relationships. I just don't know of a better tool. Cool. Ashley, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. It's been wonderful to learn, and I will definitely be looking at this myself.
Yeah, let's do this again in the first quarter.
That's great.
And we'll talk more about that human connection for not just the cost of vacancy, but putting the whole how do you use metrics and good business analytics to build your case.
I love that.
Great. Jess, anything else?
No, those were all the questions we covered today, but I know we will be sending a follow-up email to all of our attendees today. And of course, feel free to respond to that email if you think of anything else that comes up. We're always happy to help.
Great. I hope you keep watching. I know we're watching you, so we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.